Ugh, friggin' Mousepads, man. When you're playing a blisteringly fast match in your favorite shooter game, the very last thing you want to be doing in the middle of a firefight is whiffing your shots because your damn mousepad feels sticky. Like most people, I originally started off using soft mousepads, but one day on a whim, I decided to try a hard pad, and I was floored by just how much better it was. Even better, doing hyper-accurate micro-adjustments for pixel-precise aiming, it was suddenly trivial to do because the friction is just so much lower. I think my biggest shock with the hard pads, though, was how easy they are to maintain. Washing them is as easy as wiping a countertop. Now, as an extra bonus, later in this video, I'll even tell you my secrets for keeping these hard pads and your mouse feet perfectly consistent in friction even after years of use. So stick around, memers and streamers. Join me as we dive into the world of hard mouse pads and discover how they might be able to take your gaming to the next level. One of the issues that I had early on was frustration with just how inconsistent my aiming felt. Eventually, I started to realize that part of the problem was that my mouse pads felt different from day to day. Now, some days they felt okay, but other days they felt sticky. Other times it wasn't so much sticky as just kind of high friction. Sometimes only certain parts of them felt sticky. That inconsistency made it impossible to precisely predict where my crosshairs would end up landing. Now, while this is incredibly frustrating, the good news is I eventually completely solved these issues. Now, there's three main components to how I fixed this problem. Number one, I moved to a hard mouse pad. Number two, I learned how to dress this hard pad to keep it perfectly consistent as it wears over time. And number three, I started making new optimal mouse feet from cheaply available Teflon sheet. I have two primary issues that make the mousepad thing so important for me. First, I use a fingertip grip to hold my mouse. Second, I shoot almost entirely by muscle memory. What I mean by muscle memory is that when I shoot, I don't wait to see if I'm on target before I click the mouse. I simply look at the scene, I let my brain calculate how far I need to whip the mouse to hit that shot, whip the mouse at the target, and immediately click. I don't wait to see if I'm on target, I don't refine my aim point, I just swipe and click. Of course, this is a very fast way of shooting, and the fingertip grip allows amazing mouse control. You were just a little quicker on the trigger. But not that time. But the problem is, you need to know exactly how much resistance you're going to feel, and if your pad feels different in different places, or feels different from day to day, your accuracy is going to change from day to day. This is why I personally made the switch to a hard pad. There are a few things to consider about using a hard pad, though. In many cases, people use the friction of the mousepad to help slow down and control movement. With the regular, soft cloth top pad, you can even push down a little bit to increase the friction. A hard pad is different. The friction on a hard pad is low enough that you need to learn to control your fine movements by your hand instead of relying on the friction to damp those small movements. The friction is also much more consistent regardless of the down pressure on the mouse. Ultimately, a hard pad is a really good approximation of the consistent, low-friction surface that many of us want in a pad. But over time, even with good Teflon feet on your mouse, the pad will eventually wear. So next up, I want to cover how I keep the friction perfectly even by dressing my hard mouse pads. Another good thing about hard pads is that it is stupidly easy to modify the friction of the surface. This comes in handy for two reasons. First, you can make a slippery pad even slipperier, but even more important, you can dress your pad in certain sticky areas to even out the friction as the pad gets older and worn, and this only takes a matter of seconds. This allows you to perfectly tailor the pad to your needs. As bizarre as this is going to sound, the secret sauce to how I modify the friction of my hard mouse pads is Pledge brand furniture polish. I start with a small hard sponge with fine pores, and then I cut it down to about 1 inch by 2 inches, or maybe about 2.5 centimeters by about 5 centimeters. Then I take this sponge and I spray a bunch of Pledge furniture polish right in the middle of the sponge, and then I gently spread it around evenly all over the surface, trying to keep as much of it on the surface as possible. Then just take your new dressing pad, set it up, someplace where it's nice and warm, and make sure it's Pledge side up, and just let it dry out for a few days. The polish will partly absorb into the sponge, but some will stay on the surface. Once it's dry, All you need to do to reduce the friction of your mouse pad is to just scrub the surface of the hard pad a bit with your new dry furniture polish dressing pad. When you wait for the polish to dry like this, it makes it way easier to control the polish when you apply it. As an example, a very gentle wipe of the entire hard mouse pad with this new dry dressing pad that you've made, it'll lower the friction of the entire pad as a whole. But doing the same gentle scrub in the middle of the pad where it gets the most wear can even out the surface feel in just that area so that it feels more consistent like when it was new. If the pad is older and it needs a little bit more, you can put a little bit more pressure on the sponge and rub it harder and faster in that small worn area, and it'll transfer even more polish to that area. But the secret is in letting the pad dry before you're using it, and this is for two reasons. First, it allows you to control how much polish you're putting down just by how hard and how much time you spend scrubbing it in. And lastly, you can use the mouse pad immediately again without having to wait for the polish to dry. So the bottom line is, get a small stiff sponge with really fine pores, spray a good thick layer of furniture polish on the top of it, spread it around a bit, then let it dry for a few days. Then, when a part of your fancy new hard pad feels a little bit rough or a little bit sticky for your liking, give it a little bit of a rub down until it doesn't feel a little bit rough or a little bit sticky. Or heck, rub the whole pad down if you really want the sucker to be slick. You can put it wherever you want. So what do you do if you get carried away and your pad ends up being too slick and smooth? Well, you can start off by just rubbing the excess off with a clean dry cloth and really give it some gusto. But if that doesn't do it, just wash it. Take a small brush that has soft, fine plastic bristles like a toothbrush would have, or maybe a small sponge, put a little bit of soap and water on the mouse pad, and then scrub it a bit, rinse it off, and then dry the surface with a nice clean dry cloth. So if you ever get carried away and it's too slick or slippery, just wipe it down with a dry towel or scrub it with soap and water like this. Just don't use anything that'll scratch the pad when scrubbing it. Then, when it's dry, you can either use it as it is again, or fiddle around with your dry dressing pad or furniture polish again, and then fix any areas that are still bothering you. Once you've got a little bit of experience doing this, if some worn down area starts nagging at you, you can generally fix it in a few seconds of scrubbing with this little dry dressing pad that you made. If you accidentally put too much on, just rub some of it off with a dry cloth or towel. For the most part though, these two approaches take only seconds and can deal with most issues where some part of the pad is too sticky or too slick. When you get really good at this, you can keep your pad feeling almost perfectly even from edge to edge, top to bottom. But there's one last friction surface that we haven't even talked about yet. Mouse feet. Some people call them mouse sliders. When it comes to how a mouse feels on the pad, there's actually two surfaces at play. There's the pad underneath, but there's also the mouse feet, or gliders, or sliders as some people call them. It's actually the interplay between these two surfaces that determine how your mouse feels as far as the friction with the pad. Now there's lots of choices here, ranging from traditional Teflon to, things like ceramic, metal, or even glass feet. Myself, I still use Teflon, and the nice thing about Teflon is that you can buy it with a sticky adhesive back, and you can buy it in bulk sheets or rolls. Myself personally, I bought a piece of bulk Teflon sheet that's about 1 millimeter thick, and that's about 1 foot by 1 foot, or about 30 centimeter by 30 centimeters, and I just cut pieces off in whatever size and shape that I want. Even if that sheet costs you $100, you get around 600 mouse feet if you make the big ones that are, like a half an inch per side, or more like 2,000 of them if you make them more like a normal sized one. The small ones work out to about 5 cents per mouse foot. When I use cloth mouse pads, I noticed that smaller size sliders seem to work well, but for some reason with the hard mouse pads, I've noticed that larger mouse feet seem to work better. Maybe even as big as 3/4 of an inch by 3/4 of an inch or 2 centimeters per side. The bigger ones seem to work better with the hard pads. Another interesting thing is that sometimes fresh Teflon will feel a little bit sticky on its surface, so sometimes I'll lightly sand the surface and then chamfer the edges a little bit with, like 1,000 grit sandpaper. And then once I'm done, as kind of a finishing operation, I'll sometimes take the mouse with the feet already stuck on it and then scrub it fairly hard and briskly into the surface of a cloth mouse pad to sort of polish this exposed surface of the Teflon. So if you're looking for a mouse pad that has a good consistent feel, a pad that has low friction, and a pad that's easy to keep in tip-top shape as it wears over time, you might want to consider giving a hard mouse pad a try. Hard pads tend to be low friction, they tend to last a considerable amount of time, and best of all, you can easily deal with changes in friction due to wear with nothing but rubbing a small sponge with a little bit of dry pledge furniture polish on it. You might also want to consider buying yourself a large sheet of 1mm thick Teflon. Then you can cut your own sliders into whatever size and shape works best for you, and you'll get hundreds to thousands of mouse feet out of that single sheet of Teflon. So that's it for now, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions or comments in the comments section below. I'd be really interested to hear any experiences that you guys might have had. What's your favorite kind of mouse pad, and how do you guys keep your pads in tip-top shape? GG's and 7 threes.